Good evening, brave souls. I'm Grim. They call me a ghost now, but I was once like you, alive. Tonight, I'll be your companion through the shadows. So, get comfortable, if you're ready. The night has only just begun, and the stories are waiting to be told. It was Halloween night, and the air was thick with excitement. Kids dressed as ghosts, witches, and monsters darted from house to house, their laughter echoing down the streets. Emily and her best friends, Jake and Sarah, had been planning this night for weeks. They were too old for trick-or-treating, but they loved the spooky vibe that came with Halloween. So, instead of candy, they were going to tell ghost stories. They gathered in Emily's living room, sitting in a circle with the lights dimmed, and only a few flickering candles casting eerie shadows on the walls. "I've got the perfect story," Emily said, grinning. "It's a true one. Happened right here in this town." Jake and Sarah leaned in, ready to be scared. "You know the old house on Pine Street? The one that's been abandoned for years?" Emily began. "Well, back in the 1970s, a man lived there. People called him the Halloween Stranger, because every year, on Halloween, he'd dress up in strange costumes and roam the streets. No one knew who he was or where he came from, but one Halloween, he went too far." Sarah's eyes widened. "What did he do?" Emily lowered her voice. "That night, a girl named Lily went missing. She was only 10. Her parents said she was trick-or-treating with friends, but she never came home. They searched everywhere, but it was like she vanished into thin air. The last person to see her said she was walking toward Pine Street, toward the stranger's house." A chill settled over the room. Jake smirked, trying to shake off the feeling of dread. "Come on, Emily. It's just a story." But Emily shook her head. "No, it's real. They found her, or at least what was left of her. The police said there was no sign of the Halloween stranger, but some people believe he still haunts Pine Street. Every year, on Halloween, people hear strange sounds coming from the house, like footsteps, doors creaking, and whispers in the dark." Sarah shuddered. "That's creepy." Just as the words left her mouth, the front door creaked open. The three friends froze. "Did you invite anyone else?" Jake whispered. Emily shook her head, eyes wide. They sat there, listening. The sound of slow, deliberate footsteps echoed down the hallway. They weren't alone. "I'm going to check," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. "No way," Jake said, grabbing her arm. "We should all go." They stood together, tiptoeing toward the hallway. The footsteps continued, steady and slow, as if someone was walking right toward them. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she reached for the light switch. The hallway lit up, but it was empty. "There's no one here," Sarah whispered. But the fear in her voice was unmistakable. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind them. They spun around, and a figure stood in the doorway. It was a tall man, dressed in black, his face hidden behind a pale, blank mask. He didn't move or speak. He just stood there, watching them. "Who are you?" Jake demanded, trying to sound braver than he felt. The man tilted his head, as if considering the question, but still said nothing. He took a step forward, and that was enough to send the friends into a panic. They bolted for the back door, racing out into the yard. But when they turned around, the man wasn't following. He was gone. What was that?" Sarah panted, her face pale. "I don't know," Emily said, trying to catch her breath. "But we need to get out of here." They ran through the yard and onto the street, not stopping until they were far from the house. As they slowed down, Sarah looked around nervously. "What if he's still following us?" Emily shook her head. "I don't think so, but we should tell someone." They rushed to the nearest house, pounding on the door until a kind old woman answered. "What's the matter?" she asked, concerned. Emily quickly explained what had happened, but the woman's face remained calm. "You poor dears. come inside and catch your breath. I'll call the police for you." Relieved, the three friends stepped into the warm house. The old woman led them to the living room, offering them a seat. "Now, tell me again," she said softly, sitting down across from them. Emily began to explain, but as she spoke, something strange started to happen. The room seemed to darken, and the air grew colder. Sarah shivered, glancing around. The old woman smiled, but there was something off about her expression. It was too wide, too forced. "You said a man in a mask was following you?" she asked, her voice slow and deliberate. Jake nodded, but unease crept up his spine. The woman's smile widened even more, almost impossibly so. "Well, dear," she said softly, "you should know that you've been followed all night." Emily blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" The woman stood up, her movements smooth and unnatural. "The Halloween stranger never really left Pine Street. He just found new friends." The candles flickered, and the room plunged into darkness. Panic surged through the friends. Jake fumbled for his phone, trying to turn on the flashlight, but the light revealed something horrifying. The old woman's face had changed. It was no longer the kindly woman who had answered the door. Her skin was pale, her eyes hollow, and her mouth twisted into a chilling grin. They scrambled for the door, but it wouldn't open. The room seemed to shift, warping around them. The shadows stretched, and the figure of the masked man appeared in the corner, watching them once again. "Run!" Emily screamed, but there was nowhere to go. The walls closed in, and the laughter of the old woman echoed in their ears. Just when they thought it was over, the front door burst open, and bright lights flooded the room. The police stormed in, pulling the friends to safety. The house was silent, still. There was no old woman, no masked man, only the friends, shaken and pale. "We got your call," one of the officers said, but when we arrived, the house was empty. Emily looked around, confused, but there was a woman and the man. The officer shook his head. "This house has been abandoned for years. It's been condemned. No one lives here." The three friends exchanged terrified glances. They had seen them, spoken to them. How could this be real? As they were escorted outside, the officer stopped. "By the way," he said slowly, "you mentioned a man in a mask?" Jake nodded, still trembling. The officer's face darkened. "You're not the first to report seeing him. We've had calls about him every Halloween, but by the time we get there, he's always gone." Emily's stomach twisted with fear. "What do you mean?" The officer hesitated, then sighed. "There's an old legend around here about the Halloween stranger. Some say he's still out there, searching for new souls to take." The friends were silent as they left the house, the weight of the legend pressing down on them. From that night on, they never spoke of what happened. But every Halloween, they couldn't help but glance over their shoulders, wondering if the Halloween stranger was still watching, waiting for the next time he'd strike. And somewhere, in the shadows of Pine Street, a masked figure stood, waiting for the next group of friends to cross his path. It was Halloween night, and the streets of Maple Street buzzed with excitement. Kids in costumes filled the sidewalks, their laughter echoing through the chilly autumn air. Houses were decorated with grinning pumpkins and eerie skeletons. But amidst the festivity, there was one house that stood out, dark, silent, and avoided by everyone. The old Miller house at the end of the street had been abandoned for years. Its windows were boarded up, the paint peeling off the walls. People whispered about strange things happening there, but no one dared to find out for sure, except for Sam, Lily, and Jack, three best friends who had always been fascinated by scary stories. Sam was the fearless leader of the group, always curious about the things that went bump in the night. Jack, on the other hand, wasn't as brave, but never wanted to be left out. Lily, practical and level-headed, usually kept the boys from doing anything too reckless. But tonight, even she felt the pull of adventure. "Let's do it," Sam whispered, his eyes shining with excitement. "Let's go to the Miller house." Jack's face turned pale. "Are you serious? People say it's haunted." Lily crossed her arms. "It's just an old house. There's no such thing as ghosts." But as the three of them stood at the edge of the yard, staring up at the shadowy, looming structure, even Lily couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Still, her curiosity got the best of her. "Fine, but we're not staying long." They walked up the cracked stone path, leaves crunching beneath their feet. The door was slightly ajar, creaking as Sam pushed it open. Inside, the house smelled of dust and decay. The wooden floor creaked under their shoes, and the dim light from the street lamps barely reached inside. The living room was filled with old furniture, covered in white sheets, as if someone had left in a hurry and never returned. Cobwebs hung from the corners, and the air felt heavy, almost suffocating. "This place is creepy," Jack muttered, sticking close to Sam and Lily. Sam grinned, his voice low. "That's the point. Come on, let's check out the upstairs." Lily hesitated. "Maybe we should just look around down here. We don't want to push our luck." But Sam was already heading for the staircase, and Jack, not wanting to be left alone, followed close behind. Reluctantly, Lily brought up the rear. The stairs groaned under their weight as they ascended, each step feeling heavier than the last. When they reached the second floor, the atmosphere shifted. It was colder up here, and the silence was deafening. A long hallway stretched before them, lined with closed doors. Sam stopped in front of the first door on the right and slowly turned the knob. The door swung open with a loud creak, revealing a small bedroom. The room was dark, but they could make out a dusty bed with a lumpy mattress and a wardrobe in the corner. Sam stepped inside, and that's when it happened. A whisper. It was faint, almost like the wind, but it was there. "Get out." Lily's heart jumped. "Did you hear that?" Jack swallowed hard, his eyes wide. "It's just the wind, right?" Sam shrugged, though his bravado had started to fade. "Maybe let's check the other rooms." But the moment he stepped out into the hallway, the temperature dropped even more, their breath fogged in the cold air. Jack shivered. "We should go. This doesn't feel right." For once, Sam agreed. "Yeah, maybe we've seen enough." Just as they turned to head back down the stairs, they heard the sound of footsteps behind them. Heavy, deliberate footsteps. But when they looked back, there was no one there. Lily's voice was tight with fear. "We need to leave. Now." They rushed down the stairs, their footsteps echoing in the empty house. But as they reached the front door, it slammed shut with a deafening bang. Sam grabbed the doorknob and pulled, but it wouldn't budge. "We're trapped," Jack yelled, panic rising in his voice. Lily tried the windows, but they were nailed shut. The three of them huddled together, their hearts racing. And then they heard it again, the whisper, but louder this time. "Get out, before it's too late." Suddenly, the lights flickered, casting strange shadows on the walls. The furniture, covered in white sheets, seemed to move, as if something was shifting beneath them. The air grew thick, almost unbearable. "Who's there?" Sam called out, his voice shaking. A shadow moved across the room. It was tall, human-like, but distorted, as if it didn't belong in this world. The figure stood at the edge of the living room, just watching them. Lily gasped. "We need to find another way out." They darted toward the kitchen, hoping for a back door. But when they reached it, the door was gone. The entire wall was solid, as if there had never been a door there at all. "This isn't possible," Jack whispered, his face pale. Suddenly, the shadowy figure was in the doorway, blocking their exit. It moved slowly, its form flickering like a candle in the wind. As it approached, the whispers grew louder, echoing in their mind. "You shouldn't have come." Panic surged through them. Sam grabbed a chair and threw it at the figure, but it passed right through, as if the shadow wasn't really there. The figure stopped inches away, and they could see its eyes, dark, hollow, and full of malice. Without warning, the house began to shake. The floorboards groaned, and the walls seemed to pulse, as if the house itself was alive. The shadowy figure reached out, its hand stretching toward them, and the temperature dropped to an icy chill. Lily screamed, "What do we do?" But before anyone could answer, the front door suddenly flew open, slamming against the wall. The shadow stopped, its hand still outstretched, as if something had interrupted it. Sam didn't hesitate. "Go, now!" They sprinted for the door, not daring to look back. As they burst outside into the cold night air, the door slammed shut behind them. They didn't stop running until they were halfway down the street, panting and trembling. When they finally stopped, Jack bent over, trying to catch his breath. What was that?" Lily shook her head, still in shock. "I don't know, but I'm never going near that house again." Sam, for once, had no smart remarks. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. That wasn't a story. That was real. The three friends stood there, huddled together in the middle of the street, not knowing what to say. Behind them, the Miller house loomed in the distance, dark and silent once more. But they knew the truth now. Something was inside that house, something that didn't want them there. And as they walked away, none of them noticed the shadowy figure standing in the upstairs window, watching them leave. The whispers still echoed faintly in the wind. "Come back. Next Halloween." They never did. It was Halloween, and the cool autumn breeze carried the scent of damp leaves and candle-lit pumpkins through the streets of Franklin. Kids ran from house to house, their bright costumes glowing under the streetlights. But Harper Street, just 2 blocks away, was a different story. The houses on Harper Street were dark, quiet. There were no decorations, no trick-or-treaters, no laughter. People avoided it like the plague, and anyone who knew the story of the old Fletcher house understood why. The Fletcher house had been abandoned for over a decade, its shutters hanging loose, the roof sagging, and ivy creeping up its cracked walls. The locals whispered about a tragedy, about a family that once lived there, but they never told the whole story. They didn't need to. The silence that surrounded the place spoke for itself. That Halloween night, Jada, her cousin Malik, and her best friend Brianna stood at the edge of Harper Street, staring up at the looming house. It was Malik's idea to go there. "Come on, Jada," Malik said, his voice full of false bravado. "You've been talking about ghost stories all month, but you won't even go inside a haunted house." Jada rolled her eyes. "It's not haunted, it's just old." Brianna tugged at Jada's sleeve. "I don't know. My mom said bad things happen to people who go in there." Malik snorted. "Bad things? Like what? Come on, it's Halloween. Let's do something fun." Jada hesitated. Harper Street wasn't just some spooky neighborhood. It had a feeling. Even from where they stood, she felt like something was watching them, waiting. But she couldn't let Malik think she was scared. "Fine," she said. "Let's go. But we're not staying long." The three of them walked slowly toward the house, their footsteps soft on the cracked pavement. The wind picked up, rattling the shutters of the surrounding homes. The closer they got, the heavier the air felt, like something was pressing down on their chests. They reached the porch, and Malik grabbed the door handle. It swung open easily, as if it had been waiting for them. Inside, the house smelled of mildew and rot. The floor was covered in dust, the wallpaper peeling off in long strips. The furniture, what little remained, was draped in white sheets, giving the room the eerie feeling of a long-forgotten place. Brianna shivered. This was a mistake, she whispered, her voice trembling. "Let's just look around and leave," Jada said, trying to keep her voice steady. They moved deeper into the house, their footsteps echoing off the walls. Jada felt a chill run down her spine. There was something here. She couldn't see it, but she could feel it, lurking in the corners, watching them. As they reached the back of the house, they found a small, narrow staircase leading to the basement. The door at the top was cracked open, revealing nothing but darkness below. Malik, always the brave one, grabbed a flashlight from his pocket. "Let's check it out." "Are you serious?" Brianna hissed. "We've seen enough." But Malik was already heading down the stairs, his flashlight bouncing off the walls. Jada and Brianna reluctantly followed, their hearts pounding in their chests. The basement was even worse than the rest of the house. It was damp and cold, with a low ceiling and crumbling brick walls. The air smelled like dirt and something else, something metallic, like blood. Jada's stomach turned. "Malik, we should go." But Malik didn't answer. He was shining his flashlight into a corner of the room, where something glinted in the dim light. Jada squinted, trying to make out what it was. At first, it looked like a pile of old clothes, but then she saw the bones. "Malik," she whispered, her voice shaking, "we need to leave. Now." Before he could respond, the basement door slammed shut, plunging them into complete darkness. Brianna screamed, and Jada grabbed her hand, her heart racing. "Malik," Jada shouted, "where's the flashlight?" But Malik was frozen, staring at the bones. The flashlight had rolled to the floor, casting a weak beam of light across the room. Then, out of the darkness, they heard it, a soft whisper, like a breathless voice, barely audible, but impossible to ignore. "Leave." Jada's blood ran cold. The voice was coming from all around them, echoing off the walls. She could feel something moving in the darkness, circling them. "We have to get out of here," Brianna sobbed, clutching Jada's arm. But the basement door wouldn't budge. No matter how hard they pushed, it stayed shut, as if something was holding it closed from the other side. The whisper came again, louder this time. "You shouldn't be here." Malik finally snapped out of his trance and grabbed the flashlight. He shone it wildly around the room, but there was nothing there. No one. But Jada knew they weren't alone. She could feel the presence growing stronger, closing in on them. Then, without warning, the walls began to shake. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling, and the sound of something scraping against the floor echoed in the small space. Jada's heart raced as she turned toward the sound, her eyes straining to see through the darkness. There, in the corner of the room, a figure began to emerge. It was tall and thin, its body wrapped in tattered rags that clung to its skeletal frame. Its eyes glowed a sickly yellow in the dim light, and its mouth twisted into a grotesque smile. Brianna let out a terrified scream and backed away, pulling Jada with her. Malik stood frozen, his eyes wide with fear. "What is that?" Malik whispered, his voice barely audible. The figure didn't answer. Instead, it took a slow, deliberate step toward them, its bony fingers reaching out as if to grab hold of them. "We have to go," Jada yelled, pulling Malik by the arm. They ran for the door, banging on it with all their strength. But it still wouldn't open. The figure was getting closer, its footsteps slow but steady, its eyes never leaving them. Just when Jada thought it was over, the door suddenly flew open with a loud crash. They didn't hesitate. Malik, Jada, and Brianna bolted up the stairs, and out of the house, running as fast as they could down Harper Street, not stopping until they were far away. When they finally stopped, panting and out of breath, Jada turned to look back at the house. The front door was shut again, and the house stood silent and still, just as it had before. What was that thing? Brianna gasped, tears streaming down her face. I don't know, Jada said, her voice shaky. But we were never supposed to go in there. Malik, for once, had nothing to say. His bravado was gone, replaced by a quiet fear that none of them could shake. As they walked away, Jada glanced back one last time. In the upstairs window, she thought she saw the shadow of a figure watching them leave. It was only for a moment, but it was enough to make her heart race all over again. They never spoke of that night again, and none of them ever returned to Harper Street. But the memory of what they had seen, the thing in the basement, would haunt them forever. And every Halloween after that, when the wind howled through the empty streets, Jada couldn't help but wonder if the thing in the basement was still there, waiting for someone else to come inside. Because once you enter, it never lets you go. And as the darkness fades, remember, the real chills linger long after the stories end. Until next time, brave souls.